we start, of course, I just again want to thank everyone for joining us, and Joanne Empey, you've done a great job bringing this all together. And I just thank you for the legislative committee that you are running with Liberty First Grassroots. And to introduce Draza Smith, she does have a master's in electrical engineering and a master's in cyber engineering and a BS in electric computer engineering from North Carolina State. And you're working on your doctoral, I understand, in cyber engineering and for the PhD. So I think without any additional, we do have Will Mitchell. Are you representing yourself or a legislator?
I'm representing Speaker Moore's office.
Oh, okay, thank you.
The person that wrote in chat, everything here will be North Carolina specific, but it will focus right now on the presidential race, and we will get you information on your governor and down ballot races. If we have time, I'll go ahead and plot them because I have the data prepared. I just don't have the plots prepared, and we can look at what we have going on. So first of all, I wanted to explain where I got the data on all of the graphs that I plot based on the comment from some wonderful people that I put the website of where I get the data on each graph. So if you want to go and get a copy of the data to verify that I have that I've gotten things correctly and for your correct state, you can go to this location. If you go to that location, it is all the data of the race, which includes information on who was running and what percentage they got final, their county summaries, how many electoral college votes they got as a result of the race, all kinds of information. What I have been using is if you go to that website and you do a Control F to search, there's a section of the data that is called time series. And what that is it's a collection of the reports that came in over time that showed the total number of votes that had been cast by all of the North Carolina people at any given time, and then a 3 decimal place percentage of the votes that were cast for the main candidates. So just for some additional information, if you take and you change this to from president to governor, you would get your governor race. If you change it to this, House/.1, that would give you your race for District 1. That would be the Butterfield-Smith race that I know people are interested in. And then you can go 2 and 3 for the different House districts, just for information on where we got, where you can get more information. I get this question a lot, so I'll say it in advance. As far as the down ballot races or particular county level races, I have personally not been able to evaluate that. I'll put that out there before we start, because I have to have the time series data to do what I'm doing. I'm not doing large data set analysis like Seth Keschel is doing. He's doing large data set analysis based on voting registrations and voting trends, which is very valuable. But I'm looking at what actually happened over time. The most reliable place I've been able to find for that data is here at the New York Times .api, New York Times API.json files. These files were where all of the data was collected that many other TV stations and many websites pulled from to give you your live updates. But the New York Times only reported things that were of interest to a national level. So the presidential, all Congress races. Oh, if you, I don't know if you guys had I need to look and see if you had a Senate race, you would change president to Senate, and that would be in there. But the specific data, like who was running for your county offices and things like that, you would have gotten those updates from local TV stations and not from the national interest level. Governor race, of course, was national interest, even though it's North Carolina specific, so that was present here. but any of the down ballot races, if there's interest and you can find information from your local TV stations about where that information is held, that they got to present to everybody over time during the evening of the vote, then we could pull and do similar comparisons for the local races. So that may have been confusing, but we'll go ahead and start. So if I go to the raw data, when I go to the website, it's not in this format. This is I've formatted it for my personal use. Let me grab a copy real fast of what it looks like. So when you go to that website, you will see these reports that look like this. Let me put it where we don't have as much in the background so you can see. Okay, so this is what the information looks like when you go to the New York Times website. They have each listing, each line. Each line is what I call an interval. So this is what happens over time from one step to the other. They have a line that says vote shares, and then they put each candidate, each of the main candidates, and like I said, a 3-digit number indicating the percentage of the overall vote that they have, and then the total number of votes that have been cast. This EEVP is roughly the number of precincts that have reported, or the percentage of expected votes that have come in. The EEVP source, the expected vote provider source, is Edison. This is a company called Edison Research that provides the updates to the different news aggregator or news locations, and other companies that are connected to this kind of reporting that you may have heard of, that sometimes share, sometimes do data in parallel, is Cital and Clarity and AP. The New York Times posted the data from Edison Research, so that's the one I've been focusing on. Following that is the timestamp that gives us the time and the date here. So this is our day, calendar day, and then this is our time, and the Z indicates it's in Zulu, which is the military standard version of the Greenwich Mean Time. And that all of the states are reporting in the same Zulu time, which has been very nice, so we can see what's going on in North Carolina and in California at the exact same second, that way, without having to account for local time zone shifts. So when I filtered this myself for my use, I had what was sorry, I have a couple of things. Let me talk about this one second. We'll talk about that second. But the first here is that we have our time and our date, and then we get the total votes, and then we have that EEVP, or percent reporting, and then Trump's percentage and Biden's percentage. So what I did is I calculated the percent that went to a third party, and that's a calculated number of 100% minus the percent that had been donated or had been awarded to the other candidates, and that adds up to 100%, as it should, as we would expect it to in a normal election. I don't know what would just happen, but in a normal election, we'd expect it to add up. One of the things specific to North Carolina that I thought was very odd, this is also happens in a few other states, Texas in particular, was that there were these very first counts right at midnight. So this would have been, I think, 5 p.m., like when your polling places are closing. We had these votes come in. The very first number of votes was only 15 votes. And of those 15 votes, 93% of them went to Trump. And then they were immediately pulled back out. And the percentage was reset to 0.
Oh, my
And
goodness.
then we have a vote come in of 363, which gives 76% to Trump. And then another vote of 618. So another roughly 250 votes were added, which brought the total number of votes to 62% for Trump. And then we get a more rational for the population of North Carolina vote, about 40 minutes later, that then gives us 2 million votes, and it drastically changes the percentage ratio here. So this right here, I'll talk to you later. I have a suspicion of what this is, and we'll talk about that later, but I just wanted to point that out, that this is the raw data. I've done no manipulation, no analysis to this. These values are exactly what you would find on the New York Times website. The very first line is of interest. It is what I'm calling the Edison zero, and it is it happened in all states. And I just want you to see what it is. Notice that timeline, it shows up as the first entry in the raw data, but the time is 8 hours later than the first entry of those 15 votes. So the timestamp on this first one is 8 o'clock, 8 hours later. What if we plot these actually in time, it shows up differently. It shows up like this, where we're going along, we're counting, and all of a sudden everything goes to zero. Your total number of votes, your percentage for each candidate goes to zero, and then it recovers almost to the exact same value and then continues on. So that's a very strange thing that happened during our vote counts, and it cascaded at different times for about an hour. It started with some of the first states in the Eastern time zone and cascaded through. Every single state had this happen at least once, not at the same time, but cascading through that hour or so, hour 2 time range. So when I speak about the Edison zero, that's what I'm talking about, that every state got one entry in the middle of their counting where we all went to zero and then came back up. Now, it didn't go like this per se. I believe that this is an effect of the interpolation, that it probably just pulsed there and came back, but we don't have timestamps between these two values to show that it came right back up. So when we graph it, it just draws a line between the two values that we do have. So it probably just pulsed and came right back up, but I don't have data in there, so the graphing looks like that. When I graphed the images, I graphed them as it was presented by the New York Times, so that this was not in the middle, so that we could see the progression of votes over time. Now, why that report in the raw data was shifted to position number 1, I didn't know to be watching this file during the real live voting when it was going on. So I can't tell you if this was here originally. If it was here originally when the first actual report came in, that would be very suspicious, but I don't have that information. The fact that it was moved in all states out of time order up to the very top so that the plots would not have that dip in the middle is also something that I don't have an answer to, but it's very interesting. But I'll show you what happened to the shape of the data following that. Okay, so now that you know what I had to work with at the beginning, I'll show you what I did, which allowed me to see some patterns. And then I'll tell you why I don't really need it anymore if anybody finds what I did questionable. So what I did is I took and I plotted my time, and I plotted my original percentage with the 3 decimal places. And then I was looking at the percent change from one to the other. And then I took and multiplied the total number of votes that were given to us times the percentage that was given to us. Originally, I was working with the original column, and that gave me the number of votes that Trump had in as a real number. And then I did the same with Biden. Excuse me, same with Biden and the same with third party. I was using third party as a bucket of some votes, and they would have been distributed among the different Libertarian, Green Party candidates, et cetera, that you have in your particular state. So that allowed me to see what was going on with the total votes. Now, understand, these are the total votes that were shown to us on the TV, and they were achieved by exactly the same process. This was all the data that was provided to the news agencies. So when the news agencies showed us numbers that looked like they had real votes, they didn't. They would just take and multiply the percentages by the total votes to get the numbers that they showed us. So this is a little concerning to me, because when we have large numbers, like we're dealing with 4,258,000 here, the percentage that they gave was, well, let's go with this one. I know that when they had a zero, so this was 4.70. When they had that trailing zero, they didn't show it, but let's go here to make sure that it's clear. So here we've got 4,128,000, and we say 4.68% of that goes to Trump. Now 4.86 can be 46.75% or 46.8499%. All of the numbers in between those two values will roll or around to 46.8. Does everybody understand what I mean? Maybe. Okay.
No, explain that again, please.
Okay, so if I have 46.75, right? If I have this value, and I am going to say I want one less decimal point, so it rounds, it will round to 46.8. But if I take and I have this one be 46.84999, just under 0.5, and I have it round, it'll also round to 46.8, just the 3 decimal places. But if I take and I multiply 46.8499 by this value, and I multiply 46.75 by that value, the range that this can be, that President Trump's numbers here could be in error, is up to 1 full % of your total number. So when we're dealing with 4 million numbers, that 0.1% becomes a significant number of votes. So when we started seeing on the news some votes looking like they were being reduced, or they were looking like they were being flipped, that was actually a result of the fact that we were dealing with, all they had to deal with was percentage. And as what I believe is a controlling algorithm was walking the percentages, it didn't always pay attention to what would happen to these individual numbers. But the individual numbers didn't really matter, because all it was a percentage control. I will give you more information as to why I think that is. So the first thing that happened while I was doing this was when I plotted the numbers, I also looked at what happened from what I call the interval. When I look at the interval, that means I said, okay, what was my total votes before this time? And what is my total votes that I have now? And the delta between those two, sorry, my machine is not being very nice to me right now. The total votes between those two numbers right, okay. So this right here is just the difference between the total number of votes I had before and the total number of votes I have now. So my interval, what I call my interval number, is the total number of votes that I received since my last update. And then I could do the same thing with the votes for Trump. I could see how many new votes Trump received, based on the delta there, and how many new votes Biden received and how many the third party received. And that gave me a view of what was going on. I was attempting at that time to maybe see which areas of the state were reporting that were, you know, more heavily Democrat, more heavily Republican, so we could see what was going on. And I didn't see that. But what I did see became really, really interesting. So as you can see down this column, we have a surprising number of instances where we have exactly the same percentage. Oh, I apologize. The percentage is where I took the total number of votes that had been received this interval and divided it by the total number of votes received for this candidate, or in the case of the third party, the bucket of candidates, and divided it by the total number of votes that were received. And that gave me a percentage of that interval that that candidate had received. And the first thing that started appearing was that I was getting the exact same number of percentages for the third party every time. The third party was really what made me notice something funny was going on. I then received I had a bunch of very, very strange numbers though, that we had negative votes coming in, and we had some candidates getting greater than 100% of the, like here's a negative number for Biden, and some places where people were getting higher than 100% of the total vote. So what I did for my own sanity, I guess, to try to figure out what was going on, is I ran through my own algorithm, and this is what I did to try to see what was going on a little more clearly. But in the end, I don't need it. Now that I see the pattern, I don't need it. But what I did is I actually adjusted, I did a global optimization of these values to try to extend that one more level of precision so that I could see what was really going on. And I did it with certain constraints that I extended the percentage, and it had to be between those two values that would round to the value that Edison provided me. So either between subtraction of that 0.0005 or the addition of the 0.000499. And then I took into account the fact that if I added all three of the values, that it still had to add to 100%. And then the third constraint was that we had a minimum number of those negative values and the values where people were getting more than 100% of the interval. When I did that, I started seeing a very interesting pattern as well, in not just the third party, but in the other categories as well. So it becomes more apparent as we get down, but you start seeing where we have this constant donation to the third party, but here now we have a very consistent percentage of the interval numbers. So of this 19,000 that we got, Biden got exactly 49.05 and Trump got exactly 49.65. Now those numbers are interesting because they become the exact same numbers as what they had overall once I did the extension. And when I say exact, it worked out to exactly that number. So we were looking, and again, this is not a number that I put in here. This is the calculated ratio of the numbers received last time and the numbers received this time. So that led me to think that some of that is a little bit of the way that I calculated the votes here, but that led me to see that there was a definite pattern of control where we were looking at the impact of the interval, and then we would see adjustments as we are moving the percentages that looked like we were definitely having some sort of control take place. So, and the control seemed to be based on the percentage. And once I realized that, it became very apparent that that was a very intelligent way to control a vote, because I don't need to care then how many people come out to vote, because we don't win by the number of votes that people get. We win by who gets over 50% of the votes that come out. So if you're controlling the percentage, and you can use methods like this to walk the percentage over time by some sort of mechanism, then you would be able to walk the overall percentage to your winner. So once I started doing that, and I plotted the data to get a visual representation of what I was seeing, I plotted the data over the interval number. This was, I have a lot of mistakes of things I was looking at that I'm not going to show you because I just had that raw data that that I showed you. So I was trying to find a relationship between votes over time, and I was trying to find a relationship of all sorts of different things that I did not see the relationship in. And then I also tried plotting things over time. The problem with that is that the time was so far dragged out. So right now, the last count, last update of the vote for North Carolina, because your vote counters are so efficient, was March 7th, 2021, was the most recent update of the vote count per the New York Times summaries. So you can tell that if we're plotting out the data over that amount of time, that the detail of changes that happened at the upfront when our real votes were coming in, they're going to be obfuscated. They're going to be blurred because of the long time. So in order to be able to see that, I just gave each interval a number, and we plotted over intervals regardless of the amount of time that was between each interval. So when I did that, what we could see is we could see this shape emerge. And what happens is we have this drop that was part of that initial setup. So even though it was only 15 votes, the fact that it was 90% Trump, it gave you this rise, and then it dropped here to that initial starting percentage after those couple of votes, a couple of voting intervals, and then we began this rise pattern. So that is correlating to the total number of votes. It was down here in our total number of votes, so you can't really see what was going on with that percentage control down here because it's so few votes, right? 200 votes, 15 votes. It doesn't show up on the votes that focus on the total number of votes that are reported. But you can see the shape factor in the percentage control here. And what we have here is we have, what we have is we have this shape that the votes came in over time. And it has this, what I call a shark tooth shape, and then a flat spot, and then this hill area. And then we have this vertical area that corresponds to this vertical jump. I guess that circle's a little bit off right over here, that vertical jump area. And then we just slide into our set point. Now, this shape right here, I'm going to switch my screen real fast. I did a presentation in Washington. I'm sorry, one moment. So this is what becomes very interesting. Let me know when you can see this Okay, I'll put together something like this for North Carolina specifically. I apologize, I just didn't have the time to be able to do this. But when we look at the shape, here was where I plotted North Carolina versus Washington, and you can see the same thing. They've got a tiny little shark tooth there, but you can kind of see that point. And you got, this is your point here. And then we've got the flat spot, the little hill, and then this vertical area. The thing is that it's happening almost in the same pattern and at the same percent of your total number of intervals. So different states had different number of reporting intervals, but this shift right here seems to happen at about a quarter to a third of the total number of intervals, regardless of which, regardless of how many intervals that particular state had. And then here's Washington and Iowa. You've got the shark tooth, the flat spot, the little hill, and then that vertical jump and sliding into a set point. Because Washington and North Carolina and Iowa should all vote alike at the same time, same percentage. And then here's Arizona. We've got the shark tooth, the flat spot, the little hill, that step change. And then here's Oregon. We've got the shark tooth, the flat spot, the little hill, the step change, and sliding into a set point. Now, each of the set points are different. 71.5, that is, that means that for every 71 votes for Trump, there was 100 for Biden. Washington was 66.8. So for every 66 votes for Trump, there were 100 for Biden. North Carolina ended up eventually going to Trump with 102%, which means there was 102 votes for Trump for every vote for Biden. This was not the only shape factor that I saw, but it was the most common. Here's an example of another shape factor that I saw that you can see. This is Wyoming and Indiana, because they should vote alike, right? That you can see this point corresponds to this point, then the dip, then this point, and then it gets slammed down to its apparent set point. We do a bit of a rise, we get punched down, and into the set point. The fact that they should be, and this is all happening at the same-ish time, because Wyoming had about 60 intervals and Indiana had about 300. So if you take and you divide the 50 by 5 and scale them out, that's happening about at the same number of intervals into the counting process, which is normal, right? No. So to give you a little bit more data on the Edison zero, again, this is Washington. I'll do one specifically for North Carolina and send it to you. But we saw the data come up and we saw it go to 0 and come back up and continue counting, just like the North Carolina version one that I showed you. The Gateway Pundit put together an article, and here's the link where you can go read the article. But the point that they were trying to make is they were trying to show that Pennsylvania and Georgia appeared to be collaborating their votes, that they both pause between this AB time and pause between this CD time and pause between this EF time over the days that Pennsylvania and Georgia were both voting, and that they had this is plotted over a 7-day period. So they're looking at the total number of votes over time. And like I said, when you get into the time here, it obfuscates a lot of those shape details that we could see that were very, very similar in the states. But what you can see that's similar, and why I draw attention to the Edison zero, is the Edison zero happened to all of the states roughly between this AB time period. And what I see happening from my background as a controls engineer is that when this happened, what I see is that it stopped the progression of the votes. So the progression of the votes was going this way, and you could see that the delta between the two candidates was increasing. We stopped the votes. And what I think that Edison zero did was that they put in, I don't know, something like new gain and integral values for their control. and that reset all of the history. So this may not make sense to a lot of people, but anybody that does control, when you have a controller frequent, I've been assuming that this was a PID controller. There's other types of control, but a lot of them use a feedback loop. When you have a feedback loop, you have history of what's been going on that helps you make your decision moving forward. And if they did something to clear out that history, it would allow them to have better control of what was going to happen moving forward. So what I see here is I see a drastic slope after this pause period in the progression of Trump votes. And I see a drastic change in the slope of Biden votes. But what I also see is I also see a closing of the gap as if the control was actively changed. And you can see it the same way here in Georgia. And it looks very, very similar in almost every state following that Edison zero reset. So the other thing that I was going to show you, so here's our total vote. I do believe that Florida caused that Edison reset to happen. And that's the reason I say this, that we got moved. So I was able to take the total end percentage for all of the states and do a ratio to get my apparent targets. And when I plot the apparent targets of each of the states, I get Wyoming having the most Trump to Biden votes and DC being the least Trump to Biden votes. And if I put all the states in line in that order, those ratios work out to be a curve. Nobody has the exact same ratio, and it's a curve over time. And you can generate a formula that allows you to predict before the first vote's ever cast what the ratio of Trump to Biden votes would be in that state if you take the number that state is in line. So if Washington is Wyoming is a 1, and you plug 1 into the function, it will give you the number of votes that Wyoming had at the end of the count. When we look at those, North Carolina is really, really close to being the middle state at 102%. And because that's percent of Trump votes to percent of Biden votes, that's 1. So that's a 1-to-1 ratio, or 100%. So they're really, really close to being split 50-50. The other side of the state just to the other side of North Carolina in that curve is Georgia with a 99. What it looks like to me is that Florida broke the algorithm, and Florida was originally designed to be a Biden state with around a 99%, very, very close race, 99% ratio of Trump to Biden votes. When Florida got an over participation by the Hispanic community in the southern counties, and they didn't want the socialism that was being touted by the Democratic base, they crossed party lines and they voted for Trump. And the amount of phantom voters that had been prepared was not sufficient to overcome that. And it resulted in Florida being called out of its set point position. And when that happened, that, I believe, is what caused all of the states to stop counting. And it became imperative for the Eastern time zone states to stop counting. Pennsylvania, Georgia blamed it on a water main break. I don't know what Michigan blamed it on. Everybody was tired. I don't know. Wyoming. The reason it was really important for them to stop while they did a recalculation was because in the Eastern time zone, so many votes had already been counted. They only had a certain number of votes left based on the population that they could count before they were getting votes over the population of the state. So they had to handle what was left on the table judiciously. So they had to stop the counting while they figured out what the final ratio should be. That's my idea. I don't have any proof of that, but everything that I see,
Pretty good.
Everything that I see falls in line with that. I haven't found anything that would go against that idea yet.
Huh.
So it looks to me that North Carolina was originally, based on what I showed you from the other states, we have our shark tooth, our flat spot, our hill, our little jump, and we settle into our set point. It looks like the original set point for North Carolina was around 96.42, which would have given the state to Biden. But when they did that recalculation and they had to shuffle the states, Florida was worth 29 votes, electoral college votes. So they grabbed Wisconsin and Michigan that we saw the step changes in, and they had to shift them to a different set point, making them Biden states. They were originally Trump states. That recovered 10 and 16 or 26 of the electoral college votes that they had just lost due to Florida not doing what it was supposed to do. North Carolina got involved because you guys were in the middle with Georgia, and they just flipped North Carolina and Georgia because North Carolina is 15, Georgia 16. So if we just swap those two in the middle, then we regain another electoral college vote. That takes us up to 27 of the 29 that we had lost. North Carolina gets, and anybody who's familiar with PID control, when you move from one set point to another, it kind of does this. We kind of just go up and then we slide into the new set point. You can look on any website that talks about PID control and teaching people how to tune PID set points, and you will see that exact shape that we see in this election right here for North Carolina switching to its new set point. Apparently, North Carolina was very happy doing this. There was not much effort involved, and it was almost invisible. Georgia, however, to go from Trump to Biden was much more painful for her. And there had to be counting and counting and counting done and finding more and more phantom voters to get her to move from the over 100 Trump set point to the under 100 Biden set point. The Wisconsin curve, and this is another reason that I say it's a set point, because the Wisconsin F curve that everyone sees, at that point in time, while the count was originally going on, Wisconsin was at a ratio that produced about 107 Trump to Biden votes. That's probably where Wisconsin's original set point would have been, because they were getting close to that. We stopped counting. When we start counting again, there's an influx of like 160,000 votes right away that gave us that F curve. But that's not really what mattered. The number didn't matter. It was the fact that that particular number shifted the ratio to 99.9%. So in that one move, when the counting started again, we went from the Trump lead to the immediate Biden win percentage for the electoral college votes. And I believe that was important because I don't think Wisconsin had the same setup that Michigan did to produce the extra ballots, because Michigan did a more gradual step. I think they stepped in like 4 different step points to get to their final percentage. But that's where we saw the trucks of ballots being found overnight and such. So they had something set up in Michigan, I believe, to be able to produce the more ballots to move the set point a little more gracefully. So that is, I believe, everything I have. Oh, and the other thing is, now that I know this, now that I can see this ratio, I can take the data from the website and plot this ratio just with those 3 decimal places without doing the extension that I showed you, and I still see the same shape. So now that I know what I'm looking for, I don't have to do that step that deobfuscated the data. And so even though I showed you my process of how I develop this, we can go and just take the data directly from anybody who wants to replicate it. Does not have to do the step of that optimization for that set point extension, and the curve shows exactly the same thing with the set point shifts and everything. It just took a while to be able to figure out what I was looking for. So I have been seeing, the wonderful Trisha, who helps me on my page, she plotted this, and I want to get back to you and provide this data to you. What I think she plotted this. This is the Smith Butterfield race that that everyone here is interested in, and I want to go back and replot this again with some normalization, because I believe that this, if we plotted it as a ratio of Butterfield to Smith, that you would see, right now it looks like a mirror image, but we would see the exact correlation if we flipped the Butterfield Smith and went the other direction. So possibly, or we need to normalize the number of reporting intervals. But this is the information here with plotting this race and the governor race. I'll get to you, and we'll be able to see the correlation between. Am I still showing you? Am I showing you my Excel sheet, or are you still looking at the?
No, we're looking at the Edison zero. We need to switch it to what you
Okay.
just,
Yeah. Let me. Okay. Since we're there, let me show you real fast what I did to Washington. So in Washington's case, we normalized the reporting intervals. So because the governor had fewer interval reports, but when we normalize the votes and we normalize the ratios, you can see that the percentage process, just like we've seen in the other states, goes right on top of each other for the governor races as well. So I believe that I'll get you this weekend, but
oh,
so here's when you can see this. This is an initial plot that the wonderful Trisha did for me, and I'm not sure if we need to flip to make it Butterfield versus over Smith or what, but there definitely seems to be a correlation here. That once we normalize our reporting intervals, like I did with the one in Washington, making them all 0 to 100% of the reporting intervals rather than the actual count, that we're going to see a lot of these shape factors line up. I believe that'll be the case for the governor as well, but I don't have those completed yet for you guys, but I will get that for you guys to use and evaluate on your own this weekend.
okay. So you have filled our heads with much information. I know. Oh, are you still, yeah, excuse me.
Yeah, so some of it's a story that just seems to go together, and some of it's data. And I am more than willing to, I want to have other people repeat my evaluations. I want to have other people make other suggestions as to what could explain these things, because the things that I'm telling you are my engineering assessments of what happened. So if I was doing a post-mortem on why a motor wrecked, I
Mhm.
would put together a series of events that I thought happened that would result in that. And that's the same process that I've been using when I see the correlations, what happened. Now, how it happened, whether it was pre-planned inside of the machines or if it required internet access, I don't know, but I do know that either's possible. With the results that Dr. Frank has shown and the people at USEIP have shown with the manipulation of the voter registration rolls, though it almost shows like there was a pre-planned result of the number of people that would be allowed to vote, just like there was a pre-planned number of people that were allowed to win. And if the people that were allowed to vote was pre-approved, that could very easily, by a very, very small number of people, have been programmed into the machines that were doing the counting. And even the field service engineers wouldn't know if they would have just loaded the patches and the new configurations like they were told to do. I know that when I was working doing control system design, when I gave my engineers new updates or new patches, they didn't always go in and review themselves to see exactly what was in there. They were just told to go out and do it and check that it was working correctly. So this, I mean, I just want to make that clear that we could have some really, really good and honest clerks. We could have some really, really good and honest field service people, and we could have a very, very few number of people manipulating us as a people and accomplish this via internet connectivity or not. And that is very doable. Now that I'm looking at what was done, I can come up with some good ideas on how it was accomplished. So getting more information about what was really going on in the machines, whether there was interconnectivity or not, getting forensic images of the machines to find out what was going on would be good for getting a root cause analysis of how this apparent coordination between the states showed up, between the races within the states. Oh, the one thing forgive me, I'll stop talking and ask for questions here in a second, but the one thing I did want to point out about the governor race that I just showed you in Washington, which I expect to see similar shape here in North Carolina, is that although those two graphs appeared to line up with each other as far as percentage control over time, and somebody might say to me that of course they would, because it's the exact same people voting, that the same people of the state of Washington voted for the president that voted for their governor. There were 31,000 people that did not vote for the governor. So in order to keep that same degree, that same precision of percentage control, that 31,000 would have had to have been equally Democrat and Republican and equally spread out over time to maintain the percentage control. So that would be a difficult trick to have come into play.
Can you explain that one more time?
So if we have the same percentage control over time,
Okay, yeah.
right? If we had 31,000 people not vote for the governor that voted for the president, and let's say all those 31,000 people were Republicans that didn't like the choices and didn't vote for the governor at all,
Right. Then
that would show a deviation in the percentage between what was being voted for the president and what was being voted for the governor. But because we have such a tight correlation, then it would have to mean that it's the same percentage of Democrats and Republicans that both chose not to vote for the president,
Right.
and they chose to not vote for the president in equal percentages over time, because, you know.
Yep. No, I see what you mean. So the percentage, I'll wait until you ask for a question. Right.
Okay, so I see so there's some chat messages. Like I said, I'm terrible about following the chat while I'm talking. Is there anything for me to answer in the chat, or does anybody have any questions?
I have a question. I would just like to summarize what I think you are trying to show us. So in the beginning of over time, in the beginning, the votes are being cast. And then at some point, there is a stop or a change or a reverse in what has been happening. And then at that point, there's some kind of appears to be some kind of external control that is based on a consistent percentage, so that the outcome is predicted or can be predicted based on the percentage that was selected.
Almost. What I would say in a summary sentence like that is that all of the races in the United States were under control at all times. However, when Florida broke that control, and I believe Texas did as well. So when Florida and Texas did not go to their Biden set points, then we saw a stop and a change in the control set points that drove us to the set points faster for the states that were still under control. But I believe that the control was there from the beginning. That's the only way that we could see between reporting intervals 0 to 10, that same shape factor of percentage control among so many states. If they were not under similar control for the entire duration, we would not be seeing the percentage control at those individual, those first reporting intervals.
Draza,
Thank
I have a question. Do you by any, and this might put you on the spot, but do you by any chance have a quote normal election that we could look and see what that graph would look like?
I've been asked that so many times, and I can tell you that I don't have one for the 2020 election. And the 2020 election is the majority of the data that I have for evaluation, because I am a typical standard everyday engineer, and studying elections and election trends was not something that I had been doing prior to this election. So I'm trying to figure out what we can do to maybe generate a vote, something silly, like through the people that are following my Telegram channel, like what's the best house pet, dogs or cats or other, or something like that, that we can have over time that would not be controlled, that we could show. But what I would expect to see is that rather than, so if you can see this one, it's not, so rather than like right here where there's this hook and going up, you can see that the Democrat and Republican voters in North Carolina were like dancing together. That when we look at the total votes here, right, we kind of go flat, we do this jump, we do this point together, we do this dip together. That means that regardless of the precincts, regardless of the counties that are reporting, they're reporting with these constant kind of Democrat Republican percentages. What I would expect to see is that the percentage, so that the percentage of Democrat votes would tighten the gap. They would like point together, bring the gap between the two together when a highly Democratic county reports, and that would widen the gap when we see a Republican county report. So I don't have a good answer for you on that. We're trying to figure out a way that we could generate one to show you why I think this looks dumb.
Thank you.
Sorry, I don't have a better answer for that one.
That was a good one, though. I wonder if a local election, just out of the blue, like off season and everything, even that would show more of the normal way people go and vote in the graph.
If you did it through the machines, I doubt it.
Okay.
I mean, really, if you've got control of the machines, why, if you've got
It's
control of the
happening?
machines, why would you leave anything on the table?
Oh my God. Ugh.
Right? I mean,
This is the 21st century, people. I don't know. Draza really has my attention that we have really got to come up to speed. No more. I mean, forensic audit has to just be a commonplace. But anyway, that was added.
And that's one of the things. That's one of the things that Seth Keshel said that I'm in full agreement with. He said if he's playing poker and he gets a royal straight,
Yeah.
10 through ace hearts in his hand.
Yeah.
Even if everybody folds, he still wants to slam it down on the table to show everybody what he got, right?
Exactly.
And if after all of these years of the Democrats just hating Trump, if they actually had that support for people to come out and vote, and they won with this level of interest in the votes and this level of participation and this level of, win, just overall win, you'd be expecting every single, board of elections to be wearing their Mexican hats with the ball fringe and dancing around and handing out tissues to anybody who wants to come in and really count.
Yeah.
But instead of that,
especially if we're paying for it, we've offered to pay for it.
well, regardless of that, I mean, honestly, they would be saying, if they really won, they would be saying, sure, we'll pay for it. Come in and count all you want, right? I mean, that's not even really a concern, because when you see how much money they're wasting on these machines, money's not really an object.
Draza, this is Jack Grayfield. I've got a quick question.
Yes, sir.
I've been driving, and so I'm not sure if you covered this or not. but I know in the data that you had on your channel, you showed like maybe 30 intervals that were exactly the same percentage, which, you know, you said and everybody said that's totally unnatural and it's basically impossible. Did you show that slide where they could see that
I
30
did.
intervals in a row? Okay.
I did. I
Okay.
showed the one thing that I didn't show, which I probably should show, thank you for bringing that up, is down here when we get to the bottom of the counting. One of the things that I see in every single state, now this is from our November 15th to the March 7th, right? This is well beyond when the state's been called, well beyond when everything's happening. What we're seeing is we're seeing these lines. Anything that I have in parentheses here is a reduction. So this is just from the numbers that are on the website. You can go and confirm them. I did not do anything to modify this. So this is a reduction of 80 votes. And here's a reduction of 5 more votes. And here's a reduction of a couple hundred votes. But that one's more than 100. How many is that one? That one is a reduction of 666 votes, 15-1. So I see this on all the states that had what looks like manipulation, where you, like North Carolina, had to go to the different set point or whatnot. Any of the states like DC or Washington State that had all mail-in voting that was already pre-planned, I don't see the reductions like this. My theory is that these are, now notice that when we reduce these, forgive me, just one second. When we reduce this, even though we're reducing by 600 votes, we're reducing by the 600 votes that keep the percentages still exactly the same.
Wow.
So what I think is happening here is that we've added phantom voters as we went along to do the percentage control, and now we're doing a minimization of the phantom voters, which is why it's taking days and days to count 1, 2, votes over time. That's to keep the voting open while we do the minimization of the phantom voters. And then
but don't you see, like, I know the skeptics on the call, are going to say, well, that's, there's so few votes there that, that's on the 15th. Is there not this same pattern on the 4th, 3rd, 4th, and 5th?
Oh, there is.
That's totally unnatural. And so I don't know that we've shown them that. Because when I called and asked them to tune in. Okay.
Yeah. No, there is. And then like this particular place where we're traveling along and suddenly there's a 0.1% reduction for Trump and no change for Biden and an increase in the third party. This looks like where they're doing some flipping, where we're reducing Trump's votes by a percentage to see that number increase, because we only added 412 votes on this interval, and to get it to move a whole percentage is kind of odd. I mean, we could if we were just on the cusp. I guess it's technically possible. It just looks very odd in the overall percentage control.
Draza, I have a quick question. The Edison reporting, is that a mechanism that is actually used by the state boards of election as a counting mechanism, or is this a reporting mechanism from the state data? Does that make sense?
No, it's not. Yeah, it's not counting. This is reporting only. I've been looking to find out where the Edison data actually comes from. I don't have a complete story for you yet. I know some people that have been doing the evaluation show me that there are contracts with their Secretary of States for reporting this data to Edison or Seidel, and the process of getting the actual votes that are counted at the precinct level to Edison is not 100% clear to me at this time. But my question with regard to that is while I'm digging into that and trying to figure out how the data showed up at Edison, it's either real and we see these crazy, I mean, they're not anomalies. I don't like using that word. They're calculated mathematical moves between the states. So we're either seeing that as part of the real counts, Or every single TV station that was showing us this data the night of the election owes the population of the United States an answer as to why they were using this data then to convince us what was happening with the vote and how they were calling states based on this data. So we need an answer one way or the other.
I don't know if it would now be appropriate time to ask some more questions. I didn't know if you had more of your presentation to go through before you want to do questions. Just before I want to unmute myself to ask that because I did have a question for you if it's possible to ask now.
No, sure, I guess, yeah.
So I'm actually Sean. I work next to Corey in Representative Torbett's office. I was having trouble hearing it when I logged on first, so I decided to walk over to the office next door and listen in. First, thank you for taking the time to give this presentation. I know you probably have a very busy schedule, so thank you for helping us giving us this data. But I guess my question is less on the data and more when it comes to actually outside of the reasons for the full forensic audit, when it comes to actually conducting it, I don't know if you'd be able to give answers as to what entails in the full forensic audit to look at this, like what actual actions have to be taken to look at this information. The data is very useful, but one of the things that I know our office has been trying to find is the actual, what is the what actually happens or what is entailed within a full forensic audit. I don't know if you're able to answer that.
No,
or if you can.
I don't want to say in complete totality what that would be, but from what I've seen, some of the things that are very important with work that I've been doing with USEIP, they've been showing that over time, the actually, let me pop up a picture real fast. They've been showing over time that the voter rolls have been modified and inflated, and that happens right before an election and then is cleaned up right after the election. 1 second, I'm sorry.
Oh, my goodness.
And it's done in a very, very precise way. So the best pictures that I have are from someone who's been working in Colorado. And I know you guys have heard about the Mesa County disk image, right?
Yep.
And I don't necessarily want to comment on that particular thing, but because of that being released for people to look over the data, other people have been looking at other things, right? And so here is, let me make this bigger. Here is some data that people have been gathering with regard to that. And this is almost the exact same thing that happens in every county that have been looked at in Colorado so far. So it'd be interesting to see the same thing. So this is over time. So this is from October 15th to November 3rd, or ish, November, whatever the date was, from 2016. You can see that we have this inflation of the unaffiliated voters in 2016, but it's still between the two candidates. Then here in 2020, from October 15th to November 3rd, we see the same inflation of the unaffiliated voters, but it almost becomes equal to the Republican voters. So going back to when way back in November, when Dr. Shiva was reporting at like the Arizona hearing with Rudy Giuliani, he presented some curves that showed the results of the votes when he did a curve fit for the Biden votes, that the only way that they could fit the curve of the Biden votes was if you use the number of registered Democrats plus 0.3% of the registered Republicans. So now that we're doing more investigation, what it looks like is that they're inflating the unaffiliated voters that they could use in either direction to maintain the percentage control. And then they can cancel out almost 1-to-1 any Republican that votes in order to maintain the Democrat to Republican registration. So doing canvassing to understand if, and the unaffiliated is where that some of the people that are doing the canvassing are finding the most phantom voters. That way, you would not get returned mail from either one of the parties that are doing like mailing for donations and things like that. It's a good way to hide some of that inflation until such time as we get to our actual voting time period. But I really loved going back and looking at that from Dr. Shiva, because now it makes sense to me that the reason that it was correlating to 0.3% of the Republican votes is not that they were flipping Republican votes or fractionalizing votes, but they were just adding in unaffiliated voters at the same rate as 30% of the Republicans to cancel them out. So the neat, well, it's not neat. I don't want to say that it's neat, because it's not. And nothing about this is to be lauded or anything else of the things that we're recovering, because it's a horrible thing. But the fact that Dr. Shiva is doing his look from one perspective, I'm looking at the time series data, Seth Keshel's looking at voter trends, Dr. Frank's looking at this, the things to do with the voter registration versus return ballots. No one is finding any information that contradicts one another, and it's all kind of building to the same story of how this would have been perpetrated on the American people.
Yeah.
This is Jack again. I got one more quick question. Did you show them the curve that had all 50 states from Wyoming to DC and how that's similar?
I described it. I have not done it. I will put that in your final presentation, because I want to go back now that I've gone through each of the individual states. I want to go and update that with more decimal points from the real data rather than the 3 decimal places that I got from originally from Edison, to tighten up that curve and make it more believable for everyone. Because right now there's some approximations in there that they don't fit exactly. And I think once we put in the real data, it'll look even more impressive. So I'll put that in the final thing that I send to you guys this weekend.
Because that's the thing to me, that, you know, the skeptics don't believe the set point. But if you look at the 16 data and you say, okay, the smallest adjustment I could make in order for Biden to win, and that's what the sets are. You know, I mean, you've shown that very inclusive, you know, in the other presentations. And like you said, that's something very impressive to me.
Yeah. I think I have something that convinces me a little better. One moment, let me see if I can find it, where I put it. I should be better. I got so much data now. I need to be better at organize it where I put things. Oh. Okay. So this is and a lot of the things I'm not saying I have the answer for, but I have so many questions that I can't answer that I think we should all ask and get answers to before we accept that it was the freest and fairest election ever. So this particular graph that I'm showing you now that you can't see because you're driving, don't look. This right here is a graph that I took off of a just a standard website, like I was saying, where people can go and they can learn how to do PID control and PID tuning. And this is the effect of the green line is our set point. And then the process variable, which would be our percentage control in this case, although that's weird to say that we have a set point in an election. This is an example of when you have a controller that you change the set point and you drop the set point down, down, down. And then you can see that the set point kind of does this, you know, undershoot settles in, undershoot and settles in. This is the actual vote from Michigan where it looks like they moved the set point about 4 times. And I see them almost as identical. And when you look at the set point change in Wisconsin, where they changed to that 0.99. It's almost identical. Any of the states, so who got their set point changed? Maine actually got their set point changed. They were in the middle of that shuffle somehow. But North Carolina, Georgia, North Carolina, Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, Maine, those states that had to get shuffled to get the new Biden set point after Florida and Texas broke, they all have this shape as they're adjusting to the new set point. Like I said, if you flip this upside down and we go back and we look at what happened in North Carolina. So instead of the set point decreasing, like I just showed you for Michigan, now we're seeing the set point increase, and you've got exactly that same curve slide into the new set point that you see right there. From a control system engineer standpoint, which is how I'm viewing this, it's almost identical. From a regular process control, like moving a motor to a new RPM set point.
Has anybody in North Carolina checked out our voter rolls to see about the phantom voters versus those being removed? So phantom voters moving up and then removed. Is that information readily available?
I've been looking into that myself, the phantom voters, because we had an extraordinary number of allegedly absentee ballots that did not show up in the data file until after Election Day. And by law, those were all supposed to have been in by 5 p.m. on Election Day. You had 20,963 that showed up between the 1st and the 10th. Then you had another 2,700 that didn't show up until after the 10th and the 14th on the canvas. That explains the swing in the margin of victory and making it look legitimate that gave the Attorney General's race to Josh Stein instead of Jim O'Neill. And I have a presentation and video about that on YouTube we can talk about later. I don't want to take the good doctor's time here, but yes, we are looking into it.
I'm not a doctor yet. North Carolina State was graceful enough or gracious enough to give me a bachelor's, and then I got a master's, but I'm not done with my doctorate yet.
Go Wolfpack, class of '82.
Awesome. So anyway, I will send you a more formal presentation. I would love to see your presentation. I'm not a big YouTube person. I'm not really good on doing videos of myself.
I put my email number and cell phone in the chat.
In the chat, okay.
So if you'd save that before you leave, and feel free to reach out and contact me. I had a couple of quick comments. The late February change in the results that you commented on and showed was because Pitt County and Stokes County, for some unknown reason, were allowed to amend their uploads on February 3rd. They're the only two counties who did so, but that's where the change came from.
But understanding where the change come from and why it was allowed are such different questions.
Yes.
And we're finding out from different states, again, like USEIP, the amazing Jeff that works, that volunteers. USEIP is a complete volunteer organization, and they're providing a lot of tools and ideas for other states to use as well. He did a FOIA request, which in Colorado is called a CORA. And he requested all of the IP addresses that had accessed the voter rolls online for the state of Colorado. Really shocking when you see, and then he plotted out where they were from.
Yeah.
And there was I mean, I don't understand why it was allowed. There was invasion in the voter rolls from not only many other states, but international IP addresses as well. And there was there was a huge correlation from Confucius Institutes to accessing the data rolls. I don't understand the correlation to that yet, but it's noteworthy.
If I may ask, where did you get the 4.5 million voter number from?
4.5 million voter number from, for which what?
For North Carolina, when you started out, you referred to 4.5 million voters.
I think it was just the line that I was looking at. The data, the data that I have here is reported in Edison. I don't necessarily, so the last number here is 5,524,804 as of March 7th. So all I'm using is what's publicly available. And if it
Right.
doesn't match the Secretary of State's number, then that's another reason that we, the people, should ask why it doesn't match and why we're calling votes and having the news agencies use this information.
Well, that's correct, because right now they're showing 5,545,848. So that's another 20,000 or so above even your figure.
Excellent. And my figure is just the publicly available data.
Yes.
I didn't make this up. I just pulled it off of the website that I showed you. And like we just said, any deviation from that and reported from the Secretary of State's office, it's like, why? Why are we using this data to populate all of the websites and be used on the TVs if it's not correct?
Well, what I did for the federal and the statewide races was I added up the total of votes awarded to all the candidates, including write-ins, the number of overvotes and the number of undervotes. And there's a 1,500 vote difference between the lieutenant governor's race and the state treasurer's race. And yet that should always balance and always be the same number in the right-hand column when you add across. So those numbers don't even match. You can't have more votes and voters in one race than you have in the other.
So so that shows, that's very interesting. We need to have you talk to somebody, because then that indicates that the number of ballots are being tabulated differently inside of the machines now, doesn't it?
Well, I briefed the House Freedom Caucus in Raleigh about 6 weeks ago. I've been to 2 of their meetings to brief it. They wanted me there when the state board staff came back. And we are still trying to get answers to this and a myriad of other questions. But what you've done today is very illuminating. And I'm glad, because you're dealing into that one stream of data that comes out of the ballot tabulators. I'm looking at the other side, which is the poll book data showing the actual voters by names. And there are just as many anomalies and discrepancies there that beg an explanation. So I look forward to chatting with you if you'll call at some point.
I will. And I really, it's my personal endeavor to get people to stop using the anomalies, because as we find out more and more, they're mathematical calculations that were done to the American people, and they're not anomalies, as we explain them more and more.
Right.
Draza, I have one quick question. Do you support the Amish vote then? Are you for us not using voting machines and going to smaller precincts and paper ballots?
That's been my idea. Maybe there will be a system that comes up in the future that will be more reliable, more transparent to the American people. But as far as I'm concerned, and I'm no more qualified to do this statement than any of you, but based on what I have seen in the data with the time that I've spent working on this, I think that we should limit our precincts to like 200, 250 people, make it a community event, have the people that are involved with each other come out, and nobody, no contractor, nobody is allowed in that counting room unless they have a vested interest that their lives are going to be affected by the outcomes of the votes that they're counting from the local, referent, the local, what do you call it? Like whether or not you can sell things and whether or not you can do things in the local area. And then if you have the precincts that small and people are coming out to volunteer, you could have 8 people count it in the same, parallel processing, right? In the time that we're having the machines do it now, with all of these things that we can't, with our human brains, account for. And it would, in my mind, it would just be so much better to take that back. Additionally, we need to take a hammer to the idea that the state controls the voter database. We've seen that is being horribly abused, and that needs to go back under the control of the individual counties so that nobody trying to mess with your state can do that from a centralized location. It may not stop the messing, but it make it harder.
Okay.
Well, paper ballots and hand counting is what kept Democrats in control of state government for over a century in North Carolina. Whether it's manual or automated, no system is going to be any more secure than the people who are managing and operating it.
That is true. So the process, even the process of doing the hand counts, you can't just say hand counts and paper ballots. If you make it small like that, so that the process is that the people that are counting
Yes.
know each other and things like that, that added on to the paper ballots would be the only way at this point in time till we come up with something that works better. But the process that we have now just really lets somebody else pick for us, and we're seeing the impact of somebody else's goals being driven by those people right now.
Well, the biggest problem is getting volunteers. Right now, you have 2,662 precincts, and we could not get a Republican volunteer to be present at all of them while this counting was going on.
I'd be willing to bet you after this, you're not going to have any problem.
I hope not. Yes, I hope you're right.
We're working on it with them. Would you, Draza, I found it interesting because when we go down to the legislators, they kind of want to debate the situation about the machines. I liked it that you could actually share and document verbally that machines can be hacked wireless, right? Or that you did that in the symposium, that you had a mock election?
Well, I mean, every communication pathway can be hacked. When I was at Sandia National Labs, the people that I worked with are amazingly brilliant. And I would always say to them that it's my goal to make my system smart enough that I have enough checks and balances and everything that when you're there, I can either catch you or I can make it so that your things that you're trying to do don't affect the operation of my system, because I can't keep them out. I mean, we have brilliant people at nation state levels in all nations that even our best security right now, I don't know that it's 100% secure. So when someone tells you that just because they have a specific, McAfee or something else on their system, that's because they don't know.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I always worked for the good guys, though. I'm not as good as those guys that can break in anywhere. I mean, there's some people that can wink at you and be in your phone. It's crazy. So I think I need to go because I've used more than my allotted time. I need to get back to my day job.
We so appreciate you taking the time that you have. I appreciate everyone that was on this call, because the more knowledge we have certainly is to the greater good. And just thank Joanne for bringing this together, MP, and all of you that have participated with Liberty First as your host.
Thank you, Draza.
Thank you guys so much. And I
Thank
promise
you.
I will get you guys more of a written report here by the weekend for you to be able to use for whatever value you guys can make of it. And thank you guys for all that you're doing to bring awareness to these issues.
We thank you so much. That's awesome.
Take care.
Take care. Thank you, everyone.